Hello there.
Hey you guys, this is April with the For Richer Horror Podcast. The day that this is being posted, it's actually my birthday, and I thought, what's a better way to celebrate than posting a bonus episode on the podcast? That way we can all celebrate together. Or is that vain? Anyway, I'm going to be talking about the Goldfield Hotel today. This came as a rec from my mom. She was watching the Ghost Adventure commercial on it a few months back, and so I always kept it stowed away. That's an idea to do. Mom, I'm sorry for what I'm going to say at the end because you may not like the response. Anyway, let's get into the background of the Goldfield Hotel. So on a lonely stretch of Route 95, cast haphazardly against the sagebrush of central Nevada, is the tiny ghost town of Goldfield. It's home to only 268 people. Its main industries are tourism and gold. To the south of the town, the International Car Forest is the main draw for travelers, but that's more of a recent attraction. For most of the town's history, its showpiece was the legendary Goldfield Hotel. It's a 4-story classical revival building built in 1908. It was actually built over a previously burnt down building, the Nevada Hotel, but the structure still dominates the town's main square. It caused a sensation upon its opening, as it was one of the first hotels in the West to use electric lights and display running water to every room. So, the Goldfield Hotel is one of those Nevada properties that, despite a series of natural disasters and various owners, has continued to capture our attention for decades. So, Goldfield itself, the city, sprung to life in 1902, seemingly overnight, after a large deposit of gold was discovered on its surrounding hillsides. So, thousands of people flocked to what was considered to be one of the last, actually, great gold rushes in the American West since 1902. 1800s was when really the gold rush was. It catapulted the population from a few dozen to 20,000 people. Some reports even said at its height it was at 35,000. Put this all in just perspective, there was more than $80 million in gold stemmed from the mines outside of Goldfield, which meant that the town had nothing but the best of everything. And that conversion to today's dollars is 2.5 trillion. So that is fucking insane. So naturally, this attracted prominent residents, including politicians, bankers, famous ladies of the night, and gunslingers too. So before long, Goldfield was Nevada's most storied city and the largest in the entire state. The Goldfield Hotel is often seen as the centerpiece of the town. It's large and stately, and back in the day, the hotel was considered the grandest building in the Silver State. So the building was one of the most opulent in Goldfield and marketed as the finest hotel between San Francisco and Chicago. So champagne was rumored to have flowed down the grand staircase on the opening ceremony, and there's some prominent figures in attendance for that, even President Theodore Roosevelt. And that celebrated the property's 154 rooms that each featured a telephone, electric lights, and heating system. These were luxuries that most people hadn't even experienced, let alone could afford. The mahogany paneled lobby, it was furnished with upholstered leather benches, iron pillars, crystal chandeliers, and gold leaf ceilings. Plus, the property had an elevator, which was extremely rare during this era, and it would run at 300 feet per minute. I don't know, I think that's probably really slow compared to what kind of elevators we have today. But anyway, that was state of the art then, and it made it most modern elevator west of the Mississippi and one of the fastest in the state. I feel like you'd be on the elevator for a long time just to get to the 4th floor. But anyway, as the hotel essentially redefined luxury, the property had no trouble with vacancies, appealing to the upper crust throughout the country. The man behind the hotel was named George Wingfield. He was a successful and wealthy banker. He was a mining magnate, joint owner of the booming Goldfield Consolidated Mines Company, and, well, he essentially owned the entire town. It was his. So, more about George Wingfield. He was born in Fort Smith, Arkansas in 1876. He spent his youth driving cattle across the sagebrush of Nevada. He fancied himself a gambler and regularly squandered his wages on horse racing and drinking. He drifted from town to town dealing cards before bluffing his way into a job as a camp scout for Senator George Nixon in Tonopah, Nevada. So Wingfield became obsessed with high class of stock trading. He used his local knowledge and newfound capital to really get attention from prospectors, providing mining equipment and paying for expenses in exchange for interest in any mineral strikes. We don't really know how he gained this information. It's all just kind of like rumors, but someone actually wrote a biography about George Wingfield entitled Owner and Operator of Nevada. He was not a mayor, but he was more than the mayor. He was like the governor, you might call it. He had banks and he had prostitutes, and these prostitutes would learn from the miner where the gold was, and the next day they'd tell George Wingfield where you could buy stock. That was an excerpt from the George Wingfield biography. But Goldfield was not so much a city as it was like a storm, kind of racked by floods, fires, labor agitators. But just 8 years after Goldfield was founded, the volume of ore began to decrease, and many of its residents began to move on to like more prosperous claims. Within a few tumultuous decades, humanity and nature conspired to strip the land bare. By the 1920s, the gold rush was a trickle and the town was in decline, reducing to just about 1,500 people, down from the 35,000. On July 6th of 1923, a moonshine still caught fire on Main Street. The hotel provided It was impervious to the blaze, but the town wasn't so lucky. The devastating fire wiped out 27 blocks of homes and businesses, and today, this once thriving city supports a population of less than 500 people, but still provides several views of its prosperous past, with its centerpiece being the Goldfield Hotel. As the houses emptied, the hotel became kind of like a flop house for cowboys and GIs before serving its final guest in 1945. And today, it only houses ghosts. We'll get into that more later. But for the later years of Wingfield and Goldfield, though George Wingfield owned a majority of interest in the Bonanza Hotel Company, his principal partner, Casey McDaniel, pretty much managed and operated the Goldfield. As the Goldfield Consolidated Mines Company owner, Wingfield was a multimillionaire by the age of 30 and became a political powerhouse in the state of Nevada. After making his fortune in the goldfields, he went on to own a chain of banks, numerous ranches, several Reno hotels, in addition to his interest in the Goldfield Hotel and the Bonanza Hotel Company. So he was active in political party circles in the 20s. He became the reputed boss of both the Democratic and Republican parties. So George Wingfield's power was legendary in his own time, and that was publicly demonstrated when the collapse of his 12 banks in 1932 almost led to economic ruin of the state. So his businesses went down and the state was nearly done for. So he had a lot of power. In 1923, the Goldfield Hotel was sold to Newton Crumley. He was another hotel entrepreneur who owned the commercial hotel in Elko, Nevada. Crumley, who was also aspired to profit from the gold in the area, dug 2 mine shafts beneath the hotel in 1925. However, both resulted in what's called dry holes, which there was nothing there of value, at least. By the 1930s, when the town had a population below 1,000, it had become little more than a flophouse for cowboys and undiscriminating travelers. It housed Army Air Corps personnel, assigned to the Tonopah Air Base 25 miles north of Goldfield during World War II, so that's interesting. But after the soldiers checked out of the hotel in 1945, the hotel closed its doors forever. It was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1982 as a contributing property in the Goldfield Historical District. And now today, over the years, hotels changed hands numerous times, with each owner promising to restore and reopen the old property. In 1985, the building was bought by a San Francisco investor named Lester O'Shea, whose plans looked like they might come through. However, after just a few years, when his restoration project was about like 85% complete, his company went bankrupt, and the property reverted to the county. In 2003, the county auctioned off the old hotel and nearly 90 other parcels of historical land. A rancher from Carson City named Edgar Red Roberts was the only bidder, and so he bought the hotel for $360,000, which is funny because it was built in 1908 for $300,000, and I mean the conversion, he got it for a steal, I gotta say. But Red Roberts has done little with the property since purchasing it in 2003. More recently, there was some renovations done, not necessarily known if they were historic, like integrity driven or not, but up until his passing in 2020, they had done some restorations. But once he did pass, the hotel changed hands from Red to his son Edgar. There are tours available, which I found interesting. I don't suppose it's currently functioning as a hotel to accommodate guests in that way. It just seems like you can go through it. So if you're visiting the area, you can go to the historic Goldfield Hotel for $20 and have a 60-minute tour. They also offer tours for paranormal investigation. That's $500 a group, and it's for 18 plus only. This purchase books a private tour investigation for your group, and an additional fee of $40 per person is due at the time of the tour. Kind of pricey, but could be worth it. That brings us on to the hauntings that the Goldfield Hotel has experienced. So, the Goldfield Hotel was one of the most spectacular hotels in the state of Nevada, but today operates under a different superlative. One of the most haunted places in Nevada, if not the entire US. So most of the buildings surrounding the Goldfield are in dilapidated state, and it mostly resembles what you call a living ghost town. The hotel isn't exempt from that. It's said to have quite the slew of permanent guests, as in ghosts. The most well-known is a prostitute named Elizabeth. She was actually George Wingfield's mistress, who became pregnant with his child. So to protect his marriage, he initially paid her to stay away. He became fearful of exposure, so he ultimately chained her to a radiator in room 109 throughout the entirety of her pregnancy, where she allegedly cried for hours on end, begging for freedom. Wingfield at least fed her food and gave her water, just to, keep her alive, bare minimum, just until the child was born. But then after that, Elizabeth disappeared. One theory is that Elizabeth died at childbirth, but many suspect that Wingfield murdered her himself. And what's worse is, like the story goes, that her baby was thrown in a mine shaft or a tunnel beneath the hotel. Many guests touring the Goldfield have claimed to see Elizabeth's apparition, and some even claim to hear crying, presumably Elizabeth calling out for her child. While the sensational nature of this legend certainly makes it worth sharing, it really has little basis on fact. The mine shafts dug around the back of the property were made in 1925, which was 2 years after Wingfield had sold the hotel to Nathan Crumley and moved to Reno. Nor do contemporary accounts make any mention of an Elizabeth at the hotel during Wingfield's tenure as chieftain of Goldfield. But the legend asserts that Elizabeth died sometime in the 1930s, at which time Wingfield no longer owned the hotel. It's kind of confusing. Maybe they mixed up Wingfield with Crumley, or did it just happen years earlier and it was remembered incorrectly or written down incorrectly? We don't really know. We may never know. We probably will never know. But anyway, there are some supporting theories on to why this did happen. A lawsuit filed in 1904 by one May Barrick kind of gives a peek into the dark nature of Wingfield. So she claimed to be Mrs. Wingfield and tried to sue George for divorce. She accused him not only of emotional and physical abuse, but also intentionally infecting her with syphilis. That's fucked up. So Wingfield gave her a meager $400 to take care of the child and forced her to leave the town, in which they soon died after leaving. So kind of fucked up individual, if I do say so myself. But in any event, the legend, it persists, and when the apparition of Elizabeth has been cited, she has been described as having long flowing hair, wearing a white gown, and looking sad as she paces the hallways, calling out to her child. Others have reported her being sighted in room 109, where she was chained to the radiator, which is often described as being intensely cold, and on one occasion, a ghostly figure appeared in the photograph of the room. However, most people report that while their cameras function normally everywhere else in the hotel, they refuse to work in room 109. George Wingfield himself is said to haunt his own hotel, making his presence known by his cigar smoke. People have reported finding fresh cigar ashes in his first floor room, and his presence has been sensed near the giant lobby staircase. One could hardly imagine his soul anywhere else. I mean, he made the town. This is that's where he's going to settle for the rest of his life, right? Well, not really, because he didn't even die in Goldfield. He died in Reno in 1959. So it doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense that George Wingfield would be haunting there. Maybe it was Casey McDaniel or Nathan Crumley, since they really had more invested in the hotel and they were there for a longer period of time than Wingfield himself. He just got a really bad reputation, and that's why he's associated so much with the hotel. At least that's what it seems like to me. But there are other spirits. There are two spirits that are said to haunt the property. Both are suicide victims. One was a woman who hanged herself, and another was a man who jumped to his death off the roof of the hotel. There's the Stabber. Honestly, that's his name. It's called the Stabber. That just makes me think of my favorite movie, Scream, because, Scream 2 was like stab. Anyway, so the Stabber is just an entity that randomly attacks those who cross the threshold just with a large knife. Makes sense. There are also 3 trickster child spirits who are said to haunt the lobby beside the staircase, who sneak up behind people, tap them on the back, and then they giggle, run, and dance away. Those seem pretty innocent. There's also a story that miners would be thrown down the mine shafts beneath the hotel to their deaths by Wingfield, who would take the gold for himself. He has a terrible reputation, probably one he brought on himself. And then one of the owners in the 1980s supposedly found human remains in the basement of the hotel near the elevator shaft after hearing rattling coming from the basement when no one was in the building. Others have reported hearing strange sounds and experiencing odd shifts in temperature when visiting the hotel. It's hard to argue with the fact that something paranormal lurks in the abandoned hotel when all of this is being said and brought forth. There's been an array of ghost hunters and paranormal experts that have visited the property and filmed series of reality shows, ranking as one of the scariest places on Earth, and even going far as declaring the Goldfield Hotel as one of the 7 portals to the underworld. Well, after watching Ghost Adventures' most recent trek to the Goldfield Hotel earlier this year, I am really not convinced. But many psychics who have visited the old hotel claim that it is a gateway into another world. So everyone believes it, but don't base it off Ghost Adventures. That's all I'm saying. So today, there's still a few hardy souls that live in Goldfield. Many of those who still live there say they've seen the supernatural with their own eyes, including former Esmeralda County District Attorney Harry Kuhn. I think that's the correct pronunciation, I'm not sure. And he was quoted saying, "It seems like something was coalescing in my head. Something like Harry, Harry, Harry that was calling me," which I didn't like at all. So I took what I thought was the only rational approach. I ran. So, you know, if something's calling your name or something's in your head, yeah, that's kind of creepy. I would have to agree. And now we're gonna go into Ghost Adventures and what happened on that episode. All right, so the episode kind of starts off with Zach Bagans just constantly talking about darkness and negativity. So this was the 4th time, or maybe the 5th time, that the Ghost Adventures team had been at the Goldfield. It seemed like they had visited in 2004, 2010, 2013, 2017, and now in 2021. Unless it was filmed earlier, like last year, I doubt it. Anyway, the crew kind of starts off by saying that it seems to be like a magnet for the dead and an infection for the living. There were 3 people that had connections to the building and to the team of Ghost Adventures that had passed away prior to the filming of the Goldfield special. Red Roberts, he was the previous owner of the hotel. He passed away in October of 2020. And then there were also 2 ghost hunters who accompanied them to the hotel back in 2010 that died from murder-suicide, so that's pretty sad. One kind of unrelated death was in 2017. A man committed suicide in front of the hotel, and in his note, he said that the hotel compelled him to do it. So he had come from the East Coast, and he was hearing compulsions in his head, saying, apparently from the hotel, that he needed to go there and kill himself. They visited with the current owner, Edgar Roberts, the son of Red, and Edgar reported that the 3rd floor is kind of like a portal for spirits, which that's interesting. They kind of then went in on the episode talking about the background of the hotel, which stated information that I was not able to find in my own research. Of the hotel, of its hauntings, I couldn't really find any of it, so I'm not sure where they had got it. I mean, they probably had access to better research tools than I did, but anywho. So John Fennell was a bank robber who was found dead in his hotel room from a gunshot wound. Prior hotel that stood where the Goldfield stands now was the Nevada Hotel, and that had burned down, and apparently 3 men died in the blaze. So the Goldfield is literally just like built on their grave. Apparently 1/3 of the prostitutes that died in the Goldfield died from suicide. They mostly jumped from the upper floors to their death. There was a earthquake in 1915 that killed 1 man. Not much was known about him, though. And supposedly there's a demon. Oh my god, I can't talk. But a demon walks the halls of the 1st floor on the hotel, but presents itself as a young boy. So the team and their guests eventually go into the hotel, and they begin claiming that their energy there was darker and more oppressive. I mean, the last time some of them went in was 11 years ago. I don't think I would remember exactly how I felt. You know, I feel like when you're in the moment, it's probably more of a stronger feeling than what you remember. I don't know, that's just me. But they report that a custodian mentioned that she had been attacked multiple times there, and that apparently there were lights emanating from below the hotel, with the mines underneath the hotel that were considered dry holes by Nathan Crumley actually did have quartz in them, which apparently produce an electric current due to the atom composition. Didn't entirely understand that part, but it kind of comes up later for something that kind of defeats one of their claims. But so in their first encounter in 2004, a levitating brick was violently launched across the room. There was like a board lifted in the air, and the support beams fell down. Well, nothing like that happened this time. A lot of the times they were like, do you feel that energy, or do you feel the darkness? And someone's like, ooh, yeah, I feel it. So that kind of just sounds like kind of a crux shit to me, because it's just like, yeah, you're feeling that. It's just, that's my issue with some of these shows, is the reliance on how people are feeling. Yes, feelings can be scary in that type of environment, but they don't really prove anything. It isn't physical evidence. The previous episodes at Goldfield, upon entering Elizabeth's room, room 109, a voice was heard saying, kill, enter, sit on EVP, and then said, you're in my fucking house. Like, that is substantial evidence. Having a feeling is not. So one scene of the current episode, they were amazed by how high the EMF reader was going. If you remember, the hotel sits on mines of quartz that produce an electric current. What does EMF read? Oh, that's right. So then there's one person who's like, I don't feel good. And then 4 more people chime in. They're like, yeah, I don't feel good either. So that was suspicious to me. And they just end the night at that. The EMF reader was going high. People weren't feeling good. And they're like, okay, night's over. We're not doing this anymore. Seemed a little too over dramatic for me personally. I don't buy into that shit, honestly. So in the aftermath of the first night, they heard people's voices. When they played it back, of course, the audio equipment didn't pick it up. But so I was skeptical of that. But Zach said he's feeling negative energy and anger towards a specific person. And then he had the worst nightmare of his life. How is that supporting evidence that the Goldfield is haunted? I don't fucking understand it. Like, it just seems like they needed filler material because they had nothing. Someone's name is said amidst many voices talking and recording. The words, it's hotel hell is said. But honestly, it took 4 replays and the influence of someone else to convince them that's what it said. I wasn't convinced. It did not sound like it said it's hotel hell. I just heard garbled voice. So the only time that I could hear it was when they specifically isolated it and, well, kind of distorted it. It sounded like it sounded like a completely different voice saying it's hotel hell. That's the only time I could hear it. It was funny because like they got all riled up about the recordings and they mimic it and they say it's hotel hell. One of the people who said it sounded exactly like the tampered one. It honestly, I'm like, okay, you're just full of shit. That's all I'm picking up from this. So there was an EVP that said, hey, Zach, a couple of times. That one I believed. That one sounded legitimate to me because I heard it say, hey, Zach, before they're like, oh, it says, hey, Zach. I'm like, okay, yeah, whatever. They didn't have to isolate it. They didn't have to change it in any way. And then from there, it really goes downhill because there was a supposed possession. I call bullshit. So remind yourself when you're watching stuff like this, this is a TV show. The more that happens in an episode, the more people watch. So far, they had EVP that may or may not have been real. They had an EMF reader that was going off because they're on an electric current. So they had to fill the episode. The possession just seemed like acting to me. It seemed like complete bullshit, and that is all that they based the episode off of, was those like meager details. There was no unexplained phenomena like before. There was no physical evidence. Nothing was thrown across the room. Nothing appeared. It was just, I feel sick. This happened on the EVP. This was showing on the EMF reader, and then someone got possessed. No, it's fucking bullshit. I'm sorry, Mom. I know. You're the one who told me to listen to this, and I'm shitting all over it. But that was just my take on it. So I do truthfully believe that there are hauntings in the Goldfield Hotel because there's so much substantial evidence of people dying there. There have been so many reports of it. But don't base it off of this one episode of Ghost Adventures because it sucks. So, Ghost Adventures didn't convince me, but the research I did on my own did. And that episode was cringy as fuck. Sorry. So, okay, I'm done shitting on Ghost Adventures. I found the research I did really interesting because, I didn't know much about the Goldfield Hotel. I know about some other hotels that I'll be talking about eventually, like the Cecil, the Stanley, the Roosevelt. Those are going to be interesting to research, and they'll eventually be up here, but I wanted to go over the Goldfield first, as per the request of my mother. Hi, Mom. But anyway, yeah, so that's all I have on the Goldfield Hotel. If you have your own experiences or any research that I missed, feel free to comment it below. But yeah, that pretty much wraps up this episode. I hope y'all have a great day, and bye.